Hello.
Hi there.
Hi. First of all, I'd just like to thank Beulah and Luke for inviting me. It's been a good chance to go over past work for me in relation to these themes. So this is just basically an artist talk, but quite specifically related to strategy. Okay. This is the aspirational landscape, the holy trinity of weddings, interiors, and art installations, and together they triangulate the eternal creative spirit. Before he made us in his image, now we make images of him in our image. The height of our desires is not the things themselves, but the deliberate, controlled, tasteful placement of things. It is a landscape of total subsumption, with no outside to capital. Subsumption as a philosophical concept in its most basic form means a particular under a universal, and is redefined by Marx to relate to labour, transforming labour in its own image and therefore us. As Benjamin Noyes states, capitalism does not recuperate radical struggles, it has already moulded them in advance, hence capitalism is the only game in town. So the question in this place is not just about the impossibility of a critical position, it is also about what kind of critical position you mean. If you are yourself a product of capital, then you go against your very being, which is a self-hating exercise. And we all know that you must love yourself, learn to know yourself. If one was to be a genuine critical artist, one would essentially be a suicidal traitor. And as I've just said, the feigning of critique is already accounted for, expounded as a virtue of progress. So the thinking goes, resistance to this weak critique itself in that form could be the worst option for the best. It also depends on what your idea of critique does. If it literally does or should do, or whether the fetish of action is part of the pre-moulding. And also within this, we then need to make a distinction between the tragic sigh of effective representative spectacle, out-and-out mirroring celebration, and a different kind of representation, which opens thought rather than reflects it. I decided at some point to deal in the positive aesthetics of capital speculation, not as an outsider's critique from an insider's complicit self-hating. This is the position from which I make art, trying to be an unsuicidal traitor, not being a socially engaged artist and therefore unqualified to talk about the reality of professional regeneration or involvement in regeneration projects. I rather use the aesthetics of regeneration and have mainly extrapolated from my own situation. Perhaps it's not really art because that label is bound to the universal capitalistic subject and its conception of the artist. And I feel like an imposter to that, like I'm failing to perform the right role. And when I'm asked to be part of something, I think, have you misunderstood? Wheedling in anger through the language of concerns and interests, sneaking in critique through the cross-cutting themes, double failure. I fail myself by not following my principles and failed the body that has validated me. But in that failure to exactly re-perform as a proper artist, it is linked to where I see the possibilities for critique, creates another space which could just maybe avoid recuperation. I want to re-territorialize towards that space, non-accumulatively, take territory without possessing it. This is where I begin from, with frequent contradictions. Until recently, apart from a bit of character acting, professionally I've made no pact, no agreements with other parties. Instead, I've stayed within their rules and have aped allegiance to the cause. Some years back, I began to look at the limitations of these spaces. Platinum Point in Leith, Edinburgh, a product of the confidence in Michelin starry-eyed property developers, blinded to the junky realism of dog shit and Baltic hailstones, and timed just in time for the crash. Before they closed it off, before it tipped into tragedy, and security spared our feelings, you could stand in the centre of cul-de-sacs, in a nest of fences, viewing perfect roads without buildings. what's happening here. From facile intentions of layering different realities to find some kind of truth to the situation, I had created a representation of computing simulations. In this, a new kind of non-space, I had to do something more than taking photographs behind fences and collaging realities that weren't realities. This new place cared about the things we cared about, and somehow a resigned representation was not going to be enough for this context. To engage with how a public sphere is made, I turned to the curatorial and collective anonymous authorship. Back in the centre of town, annually, the urban control was relaxed for sanctioned culture. The atmosphere of the clinical carnivalesque provided the conditions conducive to getting away with stuff. We created a collective username, Lee Joss, and made an intervention into the festival, a temporary excursion into radicality, and expected in advance of the event. When I interviewed the festival coordinator, he had already moulded me, and with the slow ease of entitled soft power, he led me to a noisy cafe, to censor the exact words of my clandestine recording attempt, and instead leave me with a general sense of flat pragmatics. It was true that we would not change anything concretely, visibly. Neoism was retro, the avant-garde could not exist, as it was the Guard. Helping me understand this predicament was the architecture, art and design theorist Bavel. They introduced me to the Zizek-Coin term of over-identification, which they expand in relation to socially engaged practice, critiquing the critical, creative, constructive critique, which patches up and soothes the invisible right hand of violent reterritorialization of neoliberal policy. They advocate instead to choose the worst of both evils. In the exhibition Going Public, which took the aesthetic of the community centre, they acted as spokespersons for the Office for Artist Participation, which introduced and promoted to Edinburgh artists and key cultural actors a version of Rotterdam's cultural policy. Streamline the unfocused commitment of artists in Edinburgh with clear-cut rules of engagement. An urban protocol for artist engagement builds trust among artists, politicians and investors, and synchronises their mutual interest in the surplus value of art and an attractive competitive city. And importantly, they meant it. This was not pretend. They believed in the fact that if artists stop playing the last lofty idealists and circumvent art's role as protecting society, then a space will be forced open for actual change. Concurrently, I was working for a holiday apartment company, trapped in an image of home, cleaning different and differing temporary domesticities all over the city of Edinburgh, where conditions of filming were more acute. They had no advert. I decided to make them an advert. This room completes the accommodation. Picturesque. Picturesque. Just made at work, it is made from the time under employment conditions that I am able to film. The imposition of work in the arts, non-validation, the non-existence of a pact, a cash agreement, meant a failure to exactly perform an advert. Here I saw briefly that extra space again. within the fixed boundaries of social spheres and categories, but searching for a re-territorialisation from within. Enacting a pretense of ownership was an inversion of the rights of the space, but ultimately limited by the ever-looming entrance of a boss. Following the advice of Bavel, I took a skewed emotional option of the worst option in relation to the gentrification complicity of the avant-garde and enacting an unethical hacking of sentimentality. Without telling him why, I asked my brother to recount the homes we had shared, which I then turned into an estate agent's sales script. He was then present in the installation, paid as an employee to recite his memory as sales pitch in what became our complex. Taking the artist-run space and turning it literally into a version of a real estate showroom show home, using art ready-mades as furniture and putting the ready-made back into use, enacting the processes of gentrification before they had happened. The intention was not to make a practical success of it. It was not meant to fool. Rather, it was to see what would happen if the accepted installation signifiers were shifted and the link between art and regeneration was made explicit. Turn into a preloaded space where history is a commodity. This is the university, for which I shall work for the rest of my life. A newly emancipated servant, a maid, a server, a service assistant, conference and banqueting assistant, serving the knowledge economy from both ends. Film me again in the time, surplus to the surplus, squatting in interiors. Again layering the corporate aesthetic, but this time with images from the perspective of labour. After beginning to film for a year or so, I applied to the Collective Gallery's annual programme, New Work Scotland, with a proposal to become involved in a process at my work with the uni. But I realised that when there is no identified need, no problem to solve in a situation, it is impossible to make a pact where one might have been compromised. Instead, I concentrated on the role of the collective as an institution, as collusion, to forge a new institution from a triangulation of myself, the collective, and the university. In my position of artist, emancipating me from ordinary work, I became the employer and enacted a process of employment, advertising for a gallery attendant/performer who would sell the work. The interviewees were given clips such as the one just seen to create a description to perform, to negotiate the slippages between audition and interview, sales pitch and script, the desire for wage for survival and cultural capital.
Okay. Hello. I'm here to sell something.
Welcome to Northern Conscience Community Conference Centre, a venue pulsing in the upper echelons of the global service industry.
Hello, good afternoon and welcome. I'm here to tell you a bit about our event spaces that we have here.
Running for 25 years, we are a well-established company with a strong and loyal client base
Always on the lookout to invite passionate new members into our team, we pride ourselves in providing professional and attractive staff to coordinate everything on your behalf.
You, yourself, you. And you, yourself only.
And you can get space here. And when you're working here, we all
Back to the new kind of non-space. I'm working within the collective Eastern Surf to create performances in what deems itself public space, reenacting the images that were used to market this self-same space in the creation of unsanctioned photo shoots. The active representation is the action, using ourselves, hired models, volunteer extras, and the important accidental passerby or general public. Security guards were called upon as zero-hour conquerors, shifting boundaries and behaviour within, according to their future work speculation, making judgments as to the authentic happiness of the scene. Recently I was drawn into what might be more of an agreement by association with the Terrain Media City UK, a new kind of gentrification, obliteration by culture, where the culture itself is constituting space, place, and security is conducted on segways. I was involved in a project by artists John O'Shea and Ellie Harrison called The Other Forecast, where artists were invited to give an alternative weather forecast in that format. It was suggested that I relate to the site as critically as I could, with the ever-looming threat that the videos would be checked and verified before broadcast by some external body. Only the videos containing obvious explicit content were questioned. My local Google Earth journey to the site through signifiers. So interestingly here, we will briefly accelerate through the invisible wall. And looking ahead to the immediate future, it might look like this is the public returning, but don't worry, in the background is positive debt. This skill was built flexibly and immaterially to anticipate the moment when welfare wholly goes out to tender. Watch out for the squinting causing low visibility in the brightness, for we will see incidents of acceleration in a circle. Increasingly, we will realise that we had found its limits, its shape, and that the previous rupture was virtual. As it gets purer and more refined, it will become a reflective film that mocks us, mimics us. And then we come, hello? Yeah. And then we come to St Martin's Lofts, and the art shifts from abstract placeholder to fully referenced and recognisable. We cannot compete with the art of hypercapital, frozen in at least £1 million renderings. When a former art school gets marketed by its own avant-garde legacy to some kind of ending. From here my questions would be, how could art reenact without its critique being recuperated? Is there a non-affirmative strategy where art can re-perform events without becoming effective representation? Is there anything wrong with effective representation? Is there a potential and an inherent failure to exactly re-perform the aesthetics of hypercapital that can offer a space for actual propositions which are not placatory solutions?